Hi there, Salena Kulkarni here with another episode of the Alternative Investing Podcast. My mission is to help business owners build high-performance wealth that delivers reliable, predictable cash flow through unconventional strategies so they can fast-track their path to financial freedom. Each week I share with you the strategies, expert interviews, and real people's stories around the topic of wealth and financial freedom. And if you're a business owner who wants to learn more about financial freedom through alternative methods, please head over to my website, freedomwarrior.com.au, where you can access my library of articles, interviews, and programs to help you on your way to becoming more financially free. Hey guys, so what I want to do in today's episode is kind of give you the overarching game plan and context that you need to have in the back of your mind if you seriously want to get to financial freedom well before retirement age. So over the last few weeks, I have received some really heartfelt and generous in terms of sharing emails from a bunch of people, a bunch of you guys, who are clearly interested, first of all, in the topic of alternative investments, but probably more specifically trying to understand in the context of getting to financial freedom, in the context of wealth building, how does it fit? When is the right time to consider it? What do you do if you're at the start of your investing journey? And I think what I'd love to do in today's episode is maybe just unpack a little bit about, I guess if I were to step back and try to describe to you why there are three parts to the wealth building game, and why if you understand the context of those three parts, then it'll help you, it'll guide you into making not only better investment decisions, but it'll help you understand how alternative investing could fit into your portfolio. So I have a little drawing in front of me, and I'd love to draw it for you, but I'm really just interested in maybe describing it for those of you who are listening to the podcast. When we start out our investment journey, when we get into the workforce, those of us who have that desire to build wealth so that we don't have to hustle in our businesses for forever, which might sound like a lot, but it's for most people that's 45 to 50 years that they have to be in the workplace. And for a lot of people that isn't palatable. I'm one of those people. I like the idea of reclaiming my time, my resources, and having the influence that I want and having that choice around whether I work or not. So we start out, we get into the workplace, and we start to kind of try our hand at this thing called investing. For majority of people, the amount of information out there telling us to undertake the traditional investments, the conservative, the shares, the funds, all of that, that's certainly one pathway and maybe a good starting point for a lot of people. But as you become more knowledgeable, as you start to grasp that building wealth is your ticket out of the hustle, it's your ticket to freedom, then it's important to start really shaking things up in terms of the way you play the wealth game. And the first part of the game that I guess I want to kind of really articulate is that you can't expect to build wealth from fresh air. You have to do things which are going to help you build capital. Now, building capital can mean lots of different things, but essentially what you want to do is build a pool of resources, in this case money, that will allow you to then look at investing those into things that might deliver you the sort of cash flow that you want to maintain your lifestyle. So part one of the wealth building game is how can I take the premium income that I'm earning from my business and extrapolate it, amplify it. Now that could be through just clever investing where you're super, super active. It could be through the use of leverage. It could be participating in deals with people who are more skilled than you. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. What I don't really want to delve into is any right or wrong here. It could be share trading, it could be whatever you want. But the first part of the game that you have to have in the back of your mind is I need to get to a certain capital base. And when I've got that capital base, then I'm going to move into part two of the game. Now, part two of the game is about saying, well, I've got this asset base. Maybe it's time for me, if I extrapolate where I am and where I want to be, How about instead of it going in the smooth line of 20 to 25 years into the future, how about I change my trajectory? How about I look at taking all of the capital that perhaps I've built through traditional investments and seeing if I can introduce some of these alternative investments in order to change my trajectory. The great thing about traditional investments is there's tons of information out there. You can apply leverage. For me personally, like the Australian real estate market, the New Zealand real estate market has been instrumental. The challenge that I feel that people have is that they continue that game for their entire lives. They continue that game of just playing in the traditional space because they don't know what else is out there. But I'm suggesting that much earlier on in your journey, when you've got a reasonable capital base and you're ready to start trying some other things, learning and educating yourself about other opportunities, that could be an opportunity to take a small bite of a cherry and completely change the trajectory of you reaching your goals. And so instead of, let's say, and I'm going to give you an example here because I just think it's helpful. Let's say you've done all the right things and you've gone out and you've created a property portfolio worth a couple of $1 million and you go, well, that's great, but the income stream from that is, maybe somewhere between 1 to 2.5%. So you say, okay, well, that's, not really enough to do much more than cover a fraction of my living expenses. What else can I do? Because seriously, $2 million is a lot of money. The question is, how do you take a small percentage of that? What is the minimum amount of capital that you could take from that pool, apply them to, say, for example, investments that deliver strong, predictable cash flow, and let's take the number of, say, 10%, and move into another game where you're trying to just really change the trajectory of your timeline to hitting your goals by adding in some A-grade quality investments that are going to shorten your timeline to financial freedom. So this is part 2 of the game. Part 2 of the game is, how do I change my trajectory? Maybe if you sat on your $2 million portfolio and did nothing, and maybe, put some energy into paying down your debt, maybe your goal could be reached in, say, 20 to 25 years. Maybe you'd get the income that you need in order to cover your lifestyle in 20 to 25 years. What I'm suggesting is that let's see what we can do to maybe drop that timeline down to 5 years instead of 25 years. So this is where there's an element of play. And you hear me say this like a broken record. I truly, truly believe that your fastest pathway to financial freedom is by using what I call your freedom formula. And it's different for everybody. But part 2 is about playing with the numbers and understanding what percentage of my capital do I need, what is my minimum viable number that I need to put into this world of alternative to shorten my timeline. So if you're someone who is right at the beginning of their wealth building game, if you're someone who has, you're scrounging together the deposit to do your first property deal, or maybe you've got a couple of $100,000, adding in alternative investments at that point might not be the right game plan for you. Maybe your focus needs to be, how do I amplify, use leverage, and see if I can do something meaningful with the capital that I've got. For those people who feel like they've got a reasonable capital base, and that might be anywhere from $500,000 to a few $1 million, then maybe that's the time that you start looking at, well, what's part 2? How do I change my trajectory? Now, the final part of the game that I want to talk about, which is part 3 of the game, is where your income coming from your investments is at least equivalent to your living expenses. Because in my opinion, and you hear me say this all the time, that is my definition of life-altering wealth. When you have the freedom to choose, do I stay in my business or do I leave? When you have the freedom to decide, how do I spend my time? How do I apply my resources? How do I have the influence that I want in the world? That is the point in time where you have created life-changing wealth. Now, the game, which I'm going to call part 3, from that point onwards, is about how do I finesse, and it's not about making big changes. It's about taking what you've got and structuring it so that you create annuities. Annuities simply means income streams that just last forever. If you can get the chemistry of this right, then you will put yourself in a position where your money is working harder than you are, where you have the capacity to not only continue to grow that potentially for the remainder of your life, but also leave behind income streams that might still be there in 100 years. So the emphasis and the point that I'm making is for all the people who've reached out to me over the last few weeks who are describing their situation, trying to work out what their next is. First thing you've got to ask yourself is, which part of the game am I in? Am I in part 1? Am I in part 2? Or am I in part 3? Now, I generally don't work one-on-one with people who are trying to build capital. Like, I can certainly give you some resources and by all means reach out and I'll see if I can be of assistance. But where I have, what I regard as my genius zone, the place that I want to play in, is helping business owners who are kind of like, okay, I've got a bit of capital behind me, whether it's in investments or in your home or in cash or whatever, or I've got a really great business and I'm able to accelerate my wealth creation. And you're like, right, how do I go about replacing my income to cover my living expenses? How do I go about creating life-altering wealth in the next 5 years? Now, I can tell you now, if you can at least identify that you're in part 1, part 2, or part 3 of the game, that will put you streets ahead. What I see people doing all the time is making the mistake of thinking that if I just do more of what I've already done, it'll get me to where I want to go. And what I'm seeing is that, maybe it will, but it'll take a long time. So if time is something that you regard as a precious resource, if getting to financial freedom quickly matters to you, you have to tune in to these 3 parts of the games. Now, I may have covered elements of this in prior podcasts, but I really wanted to spell it out because for those of you who are maybe younger or you've left your wealth creation journey to a later point in life, if you're at the start, adding in alternative investments from the get-go might not be the right game or strategy for you. Maybe it's about building capital. On the other side, if you're someone who's running a really great business and you completely just want to bypass traditional investments, that is the only circumstance under which I would say, let's jump in and see what we can do in terms of building you a plan for your circumstances. And so I want to be really careful. None of this is advice. It's really just trying to help you understand that once you know which part of the game you are in, which part of the game you are focused on, it is really easy to eliminate distraction. Alternative investments, in my opinion, are strategies and ideas and concepts that everybody should be considering. Everybody. The question is getting the timing right. And this is where knowing your freedom formula, knowing what is going to be, your part 1, part 2, part 3 of your game is super, super important. So guys, I think the big takeaway that I want you to have from today is know your game. Is it building capital? Is it that you need to change your trajectory? Or is it that you're at that point where you want to start building annuities? And once you've got that, then you can start to articulate whether or not the strategies and investments that you hold are a fit for the game that you're playing. Anyway, guys, till next time, I'll chat to you guys soon, but take care. Thanks so much for listening to the Alternative Investing Podcast. If you're a business owner feeling frustrated that despite doing everything right in the property investing playbook and you're no closer to financial freedom, then head over to freedomwarrior.com.au to learn more about how you can use alternative investments to catapult your investing income and blend strategies to shave decades off your timeline to financial freedom. Till next time, take care. See you on the next episode and bye for now.